Hey, this is Zulem Urbina, and tune into the relay for the latest news in boxing all around the world. Thank you for supporting myself and other female boxers. We truly appreciate it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the Matchroom show that we saw here in America in the afternoon. The Philippe Hrgovic versus Dempsey McKean fight. Another flat performance from the amateur standout, the Olympian Philippe Hrgovic, who won the fight.
I said he would win the fight, and the prediction stuck, but I can't tell you that I was impressed with what I saw.
Because I wasn't. At this point, nothing about Philippe really stands out. Nothing in particular. He's not particularly strong, not particularly fast, not particularly athletic or dynamic.
He's not.
But he did get in with a lot of clean punches. Dempsey McKean showed good durability, showed a good chin. For me and my money, I feel like Dempsey left more of an impression.
Even though he got hurt very late into the fight, stopped.
What was this battle of the unbeatens after getting rocked by a really hard shot in the 12th and final round? The referee decided to wave it off, what looked like a premature stoppage, in my opinion, given the aesthetic of the match up until that point, how competitive it was. I felt like Dempsey showed enough that he should be given the benefit of the doubt by the ref, should have been given the benefit of the doubt. He was clearly hurt. It's not that he wasn't.
But referee Marcus McDonald could have let it go on a while longer. I think he could have, should have.
Another unbeaten fighter beaten by Philippe Hrgovic. 4 in a row, if you're paying attention.
Fought 4 unbeaten fighters in a row, beat 4 unbeaten fighters in a row, though it's hard to say that I'm impressed with anything about him. At this point, Philippe just is what he is.
It just seems slow and cumbersome to me. Not particularly athletic, not particularly dynamic. Nothing about him really grabs you. Nothing stands out.
But he is still the IBF's mandatory challenger to the IBF title that's currently in possession of Alexander Usyk. And let's see if he can hang on to it.
The upcoming Daniel Dubois fight later on this month that will be shown here in America by way of ESPN+. Philippe Hrgovic seems a solid and serviceable fighter with a good amateur background, good pedigree, but I don't see nothing special about this guy. He's robotic, he's slow.
Just is what he is.
Saw the old war horse, Derek Chisora, rack up a victory, get himself back in the winner's bracket.
Opposite the Ring America zone, Gerald Washington. A very statuesque, long and limber fighter. A moving target, outworked by a very weathered Derek Chisora.
39 years old with a professional record of 34 wins with 13 losses. Even at this age, this stage in his career, he still showed enough aggression, enough spite that he effectively outworked Gerald Washington, though not without suffering some cuts and bumps, scrapes and bruises.
Everything you expect from a Derek Chisora fight. Derek coming in at a slight crouch, bobbing and weaving, looking to land big overhand rights, though lacking the snap to really connect with that shot, connect with that punch.
Having good success with the jab, the lead hand coming in at a slight angle, snapping Gerald Washington's head back. You got the impression that if Derek can connect with a big overhand right, if he can follow that jab with a right hand over the top, he could have probably knocked out Gerald Washington. But at 39 years old, Derek is not as explosive as he once was.
He was still strong enough to hurt Gerald Washington. I mean, I saw him hurt Gerald a few times, snap his head back a few times.
Still aggressive enough to outwork him and strong enough to hurt him, but lacking the sharpness in his punches, the reflexes, and the explosiveness to really get off a big right hand.
Land it.
Saw a couple of interesting uppercuts get in for Gerald Washington while Derek Chisora was looking to close the distance and corner him. At this point, Derek needs to retire.
He does.
It would make more sense for a fighter like Derek Chisora to be fighting an ex-MMA fighter, a UFC champion, a former one. It would make more sense for Derek to be fighting in those kinds of novelty fights than, say, Tyson Fury.
An unbeaten champion, what's supposed to be still in his prime. It should actually be Derek fighting the likes of a Francis Ngannou. At this stage in Derek's career, that's the only thing that makes sense, because as far as
we know, Derek's not going to win a world title, and we know that he's just a shell of his former self.
game as ever, Derek Chisora comes to fight, which is why people still pay to see him. But yesterday's Derek Chisora,
There's not much more to give the sport, and You know, he's going to run out of fights like the Gerald Washington fight. That Derek Chisora is a fighter that doesn't fight on the cheap, that makes very good money in spite of having losses in the double digits. The only way I could see him continuing to get that money is to fight more interesting and dangerous opponents, but that's particularly dangerous for him because he's 39 years old with losses in the double digits.
Opposite the ring, Gerald Washington, a PBC import.
Very recently, we saw Charles Martin, yet another PBC heavyweight over there on the top-ranked side of things. Yesterday, we saw Gerald Washington.
He's in a Matchroom show.
PBC's likely outsourcing those guys because they ain't got nothing for them to do on their own side of things, so you know.
They're not guys they're all that invested in.
Derek Chisora has lost about four times in his last 6 fights. He's 39 years old. He managed to get himself back in the winner's bracket yesterday, but I don't think he has much more to give the sport. And I think that he should take this as an opportunity to retire on a high, retire off a win.
Why don't he explore fighting ex-UFC fighters, ex-MMA guys like Tyson Fury is doing? That makes a lot more sense for Derek than it does for Tyson.
Makes a lot more sense for him. Derek Chisora don't fight on the cheap, and I understand that. He could probably still make a lot of money with those kinds of crossover novelty fights, but at this point, I don't think he has much more left to give the sport of boxing, and he should seriously consider retirement. Then come to the main event of that same card, Anthony Joshua versus late replacement Robert Helenius, a fighter who's very different than the fighter that he was preparing for in Dillian Fight. Bigger guy, bigger target, more power.
Arguably.
Robert Helenius actually got off to a fast start in the first round. You saw that he came out there with intention, with aggression, wanting to end the contest early, stepping into his punches as Anthony was either tentative or poised.
It depends on who you ask.
Nice little body shots there in the first round from Robert Helenius, and Anthony giving Robert that much respect that he didn't open up much in that round, just throwing single jabs.
Mostly.
So he did get in with a decent-looking right hand, not flush enough to get Robert out of there early, and I wasn't expecting a first-round knockout.
But I didn't expect it to last as long as the 7th either.
Landed a decent-looking right hand towards the end of the first round and a decent-looking left hook at the start of the second, though still very cautious, very weary of Robert Helenius' power.
Wasn't really putting it on him, wasn't really applying pressure.
Still careful in the second round. In the second round, we saw Robert Helenius land 3 consecutive jabs in succession without a response from Anthony, and I didn't like that. I didn't like the number of jabs he was taking, that his nose was bloodied throughout the course of the match.
He's clearly the faster fighter of the two, faster hands and faster feet, but he was getting touched.
Tentative, throwing single jabs in the third, pecking away at Robert Helenius, not really yet committing to anything. Jabs upstairs, jabs to the body,
To the chest.
Still very careful. Noticeable boos in the third round. The crowd going impatient, wanting something to happen, something big.
Anthony Joshua's evolution into a more cerebral fighter does not yield the same fan-friendly aesthetic that his previous fights did. He's more of a thinker these days, for better or worse.
Still just singles in the third. Did manage to get in with an interesting looking right hand, though just not flush enough to score a knockout. Not enough, not close enough, not hard enough to finish the fight early.
On the receiving end of few Robert Helenius jabs, Anthony Joshua's left eye started to swell up at the end of the third.
2 minutes into the fourth, once again, Anthony gets in with a decent-looking right hand. I mean, it's not that he wasn't letting the right hand go so much as he wasn't really committing to it. He was just off the mark.
You could see it snap Robert Helenius' head back. You could see that the punches were hurting Robert Helenius, but they weren't coming in succession. Anthony didn't throw much in terms of
It
combinations.
was really only 1 punch at a time, 1 and 2 punches at a time. Nothing too ambitious, nothing too ballsy.
Still giving off that impression that Anthony is overthinking things. I mean, this is Robert Helenius we're talking about.
Most will point to Anthony being somewhat
Shy.
hesitant, scared to pull the trigger, but Robert Helenius wasn't all that ambitious himself, just circling away, trying to stay out of the way of Anthony Joshua's straight jab from the outside coming in, not taking very many chances.
Two guys giving each other a lot of respect. That's what I saw.
You know, this goes on for a while. 7th round rolls around. Robert Helenius has slowed down a bit, and Anthony Joshua finally finds his range, finally connects with a monster right hand that sends Robert falling to the canvas. In truth, Anthony always had the power to end this fight and end it early. He always had the power to end the fight in emphatic fashion. It's the hesitance that drug this out, the tentativeness.
It's nerves.
It's nerves is what it is. He's a strong finisher, and he still has the capacity to be a strong finisher, but it's being caught between styles. It's trying to evolve into a more cerebral fighter instead of a wrecking machine. It's not quite committing to the right hand when the opportunity to land it is there because there were opportunities to close the show early. Anthony just didn't bite, didn't want to, wanted to stay behind his jab.
Can't say that I liked what I saw. It is concerning.
Though bringing us all back down to earth, because Deontay Wilder could be Anthony's next opponent, and because Robert Helenius is a common opponent between them, I have to remind you that triangle theories don't work. Just because Deontay Wilder finished this guy in 1 round and Anthony needed 7.
That doesn't speak to what the fight between them would look like, because Robert Helenius is nothing like Deontay Wilder, and Robert Helenius was a late replacement. This is not what Anthony Joshua spent weeks in camp preparing for. He was preparing for a shorter, stumpier fighter than himself, not a taller guy.
Late replacements have a habit of doing that because that's not what you were getting ready for. That's not what you've had in mind in preparation.
It's not.
Attention now turns to the Deontay Wilder fight. Anthony Joshua on Deontay Wilder's trainer, Malik Scotch, predicting Wilder will knock him out early. No disrespect to Gerald Washington, but I analyzed what Malik said about the fighter he brought over to fight Derek Chisora versus what he's actually done. I realized talk is cheap. People talk a lot, but they don't always deliver.
Malik trained Gerald Washington for that fight with Derek Chisora that took place on the undercard. Gerald didn't win.
In spite of whatever Malik had to say ahead of the fight, during the fight and after it, his fighter didn't deliver. Anthony anticipates it'll be the same with Deontay Wilder.
Deontay, who it don't look like he's going to have any fight this year. Any fight at all.
Per Eddie Hearn's full update and plans for the Joshua versus Wilder fight in Saudi, following the KO of Robert Helenius, everything we're hearing is that the fight's going to go ahead in January. And if it does, it will have been over a year's time since Deontay Wilder's last fight. Deontay Wilder, who has boxed for only 1 round, less than 1 round in the last 2 years.
Anthony may have raised some concerns with that performance against Robert, but it's concerning as well that Deontay Wilder will have considerable ring rust to shake off if the fight takes place in January.
As Eddie Hearn has declared, they will look to finalize the Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder fight in the next few days, January in Saudi Arabia being the known target.
Anthony Joshua himself was asked about potentially fighting Deontay next after the Robert Helenius knockout. My back. Is there a doctor in here? Because my back's gone. Because I've been carrying the heavyweight division.
Stout observation when the reigning WBC champion is off somewhere, boxing a guy that never boxed before. It's a stout observation to say that people are actually waiting on Anthony's next fight more than they're waiting on Tyson's.
His performance in what could be the Deontay Wilder fight in January has left us with a lot to think about in the coming weeks and months.
It was a C-class performance from Anthony Joshua. There were concerns to be raised on both sides ahead of what could be a Joshua versus Wilder fight, though just looking at this one, grading how Anthony looked with Robert,
He labored too much. He was tentative.
he's got the power to get guys like this out of there quickly, but he's still hesitant, still unsure of himself.
It shouldn't have took this long.
To dispatch today's Robert Helenius that's pushing 40 and has been stopped 3 times before, it shouldn't have took this long to get him out of there. We then come to the main event of the top-ranked card later on yesterday, the long-awaited fight between Emmanuel Navarrete, the champion, versus Oscar Valdez, the challenger, the fighter with more time at this weight, who I felt would be more acclimated.
Thought he would be the sharper puncher, the better boxer, and he was just another guy that Emmanuel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed with his awkwardness, with his aggressiveness.
I went with Oscar Valdez to win the fight, and I went with Oscar to win the fight by way of knockout off of clean counters, counter-punching, and he was getting off those counter shots, but they weren't having the desired effect. They were not able to put a dent in Emmanuel Navarrete, who got off to a fast start.
I had Emmanuel Navarrete sweeping the first 3 rounds of the fight. Oscar Valdez started this thing off at a deficit, a noticeable deficit, as Navarrete stayed in character, stepping into his shots, throwing punches in bunches.
Oscar Valdez showed shades of what I expected him to do, getting under and or around Emmanuel Navarrete's sweeping hooks and uppercuts, playing at the angles,
Trying to set up counters.
So he seemed a man quickly overwhelmed after the first 3 rounds. I gave him the 4th.
By the skin of his teeth.
Off of his movement, bobbing and weaving, slipping and hooking.
Gave Oscar the 4th round.
More of the same in the 5th round. 3 rounds to 2 in favor of Emmanuel Navarrete after 5, with Oscar picking up the 5th round on my card.
Bending at the waist, bending at the knees.
Trying desperately to set up a big counter shot, a big counter punch like the one that floored Miguel Berchelt in his fight with Oscar Valdez, with the difference being that Emmanuel Navarrete was a much more durable fighter than I anticipated.
It's not that the counters weren't getting in, they were. It's that they weren't having any effect on Emmanuel. Oscar was unable to hold him back or slow him down.
He was generous, very generous, though it looked a lot like 8-4 to me.
I underestimated Emmanuel Navarrete. Behind how he looked in the Baez fight, the Gonzalez fight, and the more recent Liam Wilson fight, I grossly underestimated Emmanuel Navarrete, thinking that if Liam Wilson can knock you down, Oscar Valdez might knock you out.
Oscar couldn't do it, and it wasn't because the counters weren't getting in. It wasn't because the counters weren't landing. It's because the counters were not having the desired effect on Emmanuel, who's a very unconventional boxer. Parallels that I draw.
Parallels I drew between what I thought this fight would look like and the Burchelt fight from over a year ago. They're both pressure guys. They both are, but they do have differences.
Emmanuel is a lot more durable than Miguel Burchelt. You know, stylistically, Oscar did have the right style for the job, but he didn't have a big enough punch to get this guy off of him.
Right style for the job, but not the right size punch. He's not the physical specimen. He ain't got the engine.
The lungs of Emmanuel Navarrete, who can throw punches in bunches from the opening round to the final round, and that's what he did. He stayed in character the way pressure fighters often do, though what I didn't anticipate is that he would be able to take Oscar's best.
Yeah.
His best shots.
Didn't have a scratch on him after the fight.
What often appear as flaws in Emmanuel Navarrete's game, the way he lunges in, looking for big shots, big punches, stepping into his punches, though not off balance. These wide hooks and shovel uppercuts that look like they can be countered.
Nothing bothered him.
I'm hard-pressed to conjure up a super featherweight in today's super featherweight division that I think stands a chance against Emmanuel Navarrete.
Challenger, a champion.
He's dominant. Far more dominant than I anticipated, and far more dominant than Oscar thought. Oscar found out the hard way.